What if I told you that the governor of Pennsylvania's honeymoon phase with the legislature appears to be over? After a roundly praised budget last year, Governor Shapiro's budget this year is, in his own words, ambitious. So what is the reaction to this budget? Can it get through both chambers of the legislative branch? And what solutions do business owners across Pennsylvania want to see? We're joined by Greg Moreland, the Pennsylvania State Director of the National Federation of Independent Business, to break down those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. It is that time of year again. The governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, has once again presented his budget address. And this year, unlike last year, it's been received a little bit differently. As viewers may know, last year the governor's budget address was roundly praised by Republicans and Democrats alike, tweaks that they wanted, but considered a good budget. This year, the reception's been a little bit different. We're joined by Greg Moreland, who is the Pennsylvania State Director of the National Federation of Independent Business. Greg, welcome back to Face the Issues. Thank you for always taking the time to join us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me back, Sam.
Before I jump into the specifics of Governor Shapiro's budget address, just a general question for our viewers. There's a question that we get from time to time. The governor every year presents a budget. In Pennsylvania, unlike the U.S. government, if we don't have a budget, the government shuts down. So we're required to have a budget to operate. Now, when the governor gives that address, what happens next? He's done it. What happens now? Is it an up or down vote by the legislative branch, or do they go and try to amend it? What's the process from here forward so our viewers understand kind of what's being worked on right now?
Sure. So thankfully, it is only an address. The governor has the first chance to put his public policy ambitions out there before the General Assembly gets into the nuts and bolts and the dollar figures of it. The governor proposes, and like you said, Governor Shapiro proposed ambitious. I could think of a few other adjectives to describe it by, but he has proposed a very ambitious budget. Now it'll go to the General Assembly and the appropriations staff to really work through with the line items. The governor usually presents a very large picture budget, but the General Assembly is the one that really drills down into the line items and decides what will be in that final product.
So the governor's budget address is similar to the state's version of, say, the President's State of the Union, where they kind of give the high levels of what they would like, or the president, or this case, the governor, would like to see. But it's really up to the legislative branch to actually draft that document up. And it may look different, is what you're saying, than what the governor asked for.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's been a time in history where, the governor presents the budget and there are no changes to that budget and it's enacted by the General Assembly with little or no discussion. I think the General Assembly has a duty, a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that we are spending money wisely and on programs of value. And so oftentimes, even within or outside of the same political party, there are disagreements on what the priorities are. And sometimes, one legislator may want to fund a pet project in the district or, a statewide program or get something off the ground with a pilot program. And so there's always different, push and pull opportunities there for the governor and the General Assembly.
Separation of powers at its finest. So, all right, Greg, thank you for that explanation. Let's kind of get into this budget itself. Just starting off, top lines. What do you like about this budget, and what concerns you about this budget?
Yeah, Sam, I wish I had a more glowing review of the budget proposal that Governor Shapiro has laid out there. It's just far too expensive. At the end of the day, he really wants to spend every dollar in the coffers of the Commonwealth on programs, one-time initiatives. And so this year he has proposed a $48.34 billion budget, and that's an increase of state appropriations of about $3.7 billion or 8.4%. Now, traditionally, historically, the average is around 3.4%. So we are 5 points higher in that percentage, with Governor Shapiro's proposal. He does nothing in this budget to address the structural deficit that is looming in several years. Yet he actually exacerbates the problem more by spending down all of the excess money that Harrisburg has. And I'll note one thing that he mentioned, that, it's time to invest and spend the surplus that's, quote, squirreled away in Harrisburg. Yet he completely ignores the fact that the Pennsylvania's and the Commonwealth's bond rating was increased and upgraded due to the fact that we have a strong financial position right now of money saved away in that rainy day fund. And so, the fact that he's proposing over the next 5 years to essentially drain, your checking, your savings, and your retirement accounts, if a human, a regular constituent or a business owner did this, they'd be broke, they'd be filing for bankruptcy, and they'd be closing their doors forever. So it's a little bit surprising to see him go out on a limb like this, but I think it's no secret in Harrisburg that he has higher ambitions in the future, and so maybe that's playing into some of his ambitious budgeting here.
And that was my next question, Greg. Last year, as I alluded to this in the opening, and you joined us last year and said, honestly, this is a much better budget than what his predecessor, Governor Wolf, usually came up with. He mentioned in his address last year, look, I realize not everybody's going to love every part of this, but I got to get this through a slim majority of Democrats in the House and the slim majority in the Republican Senate. And he was largely praised by members of both parties for attempting at least to create something that was amenable to both sides. What shifted from last year to this year?
I really think that there was some bad blood at the end of the budgeting season last year with the Senate Republicans and the governor's office. There had been an agreement. We understood that there would be $100 million set aside for Lifeline scholarships to get, our children in failing school districts out of those school districts and into schools that will actually help them and give them a quality education. He line item vetoed that. And so I think that created a lot of bad blood, and that prolonged the budget process last year. Unfortunately, we're going to continue down that path. I'm not sure that there's much here that the Republicans and the Democrats are going to see as agreeable. And so I think we're in for a long budget season, to say the least.
Yeah. Let's look at some of those numbers you brought up earlier. Over $48 billion at the top line. That is an increase from about 45 last year, over 8% increase. The one number that jumps out is that the budget increases spending by 7 to 8%, but tax revenues are going to only increase by 2%. And so again, you don't need to be an economics major to do the math. 7 is greater than 2. And so there's going to be a deficit somewhere. But what's interesting is Governor Shapiro wants to hold the line on taxes. He does not want to increase the tax rate. That's something he campaigned on. That's something that he said he doesn't want to raise the corporate tax. He does not want to raise the personal income tax. So where does that 5 to 6% deficit, where does that get made up in his budget?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the general fund balance this year and what was approved last year, right? Let's start there. It was a $45.02 billion budget last year. Revenues coming in right now, year to date, are looking like that's going to be around 43.12 are going to be the revenues, right? And so 45.02 minus 43.12, we're already running about a $1.8 billion deficit this year. And so you can't deficit spend your way into prosperity. What the governor is proposing is we have about over $10 billion in the rainy day fund, which is a fund set aside for cases of absolute emergency, right? Think of that as your money market account, your stock market account, right? You're not going to touch that until you absolutely have to, right? Well, there's excess money in the general fund as well due to prior year estimates being low and the revenues actually being high, mainly over the pandemic, honestly. And so what he's proposing is this drastic increase in spending this year, but that doesn't stop this year. It continues in continuous years. He has to put out a 5-year budget, and in every year that spending increases. Well, revenues are not increasing at the same rate, right? And so if to put this in a personal aspect, if you have to balance your checking fund, sometimes you have to dip into your savings account to help balance that checking account for the month for your expenditures. Well, what Governor Shapiro is proposing over the next 5 years is that he wants to spend down every dollar in the savings account, and he wants to drain the rainy day fund or your stock market or money market account. He wants to drain that. And in 2028, this Commonwealth's going to absolutely be forced to raise taxes. It's inevitable if we continue down this path. Government spending is far out of line with where the revenues are. It's not like the government makes widgets and they can sell more widgets, right? They get this money from taxpayers. This is taxpayers' money. And what we've seen kind of in his budget proposal is more pet projects, more walking around money, more district-centric projects that may get some votes here in the next upcoming election cycle. And so, we at NFIB really believe that the taxpayer is the one that should retain that money. The business owner is the one that should be allowed to keep more of their hard-earned money and grow their business, pay their individual employees more, increase that benefits package even more than they've already done over the last several years. But that's not necessarily what we're seeing here. We're seeing an inevitability of a tax increase if Governor Shapiro continues down this path and the General Assembly would approve such a large budget.
And Greg, how much did you say right now is in that, what we call that rainy day fund?
I believe there's about in between 11 and 14 billion dollars, and I know that's a large discrepancy there, but I know it's significant, right? And what you'll see some of the proponents point to right now is to say, look, this money's just sitting there collecting dust, right? We need to spend this on things right now, today. There are people that need these dollars and these programs today. And while that may be true, you can't just have such a short-sighted view of the state budget process. And that's unfortunately what we're seeing come out in some of these appropriations hearings is that, some of these members and senators, they're only really worried about this upcoming year and what is directly in front of us. And I think that really makes for poor policy when you are only looking at the short term, but completely ignoring the long-term cost of spending so much money.
And to your point, Greg, if it is in that 11 to 14 range, I mean, this year alone, they would need some $3 billion to make that meet. And then that additional spending, if that never increases, to just maintain the programs funded this year, we're talking, to your point, in 4 or 5 years, that fund is depleted. And so, Greg, we're going to go to the break real quick. When we come back, I want to get into some of the policy, the things that the governor wants to fund, and then NFIB's proposals on what solutions would work. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website for more information. Visit lighthousetv.org to stay connected. There you can find out what's currently on the air and coming up. How to watch in your area on cable, satellite, broadcast, or streaming devices. Watch past programs or our live stream. Follow us on social media and learn more about the station, our hosts, and our programming. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Greg, thanks again for joining us. I want to get into some of the priorities in this budget. Top lines, we talked about the numbers, but some of the top priorities, education, which again seems to be every budget, every governor, education funding is front and center. Economic development, Governor Shapiro's proposed marijuana regulations, and even moving us toward that idea of legalizing recreational marijuana, a minimum wage increase, the environmental protections and so forth. The education seems to be always at the core of this. And the proposed budget, there's a $1.072 billion increase to basic education. That breaks down $172 million for first year, or $872 million for first year adequacy investment, $200 million in the basic education funding formula. You had mentioned earlier that education is actually where a lot of the relationship between the governor and the legislative branch breaks down. Where do you see the education thing moving, especially given that the courts have weighed in saying that there is an issue with the funding formula? Where do you see, whether it's budget-wise or funding formula-wise, where do you see that conversation moving?
Sure, I think this is going to be a big fight this year, quite honestly. $1.1 billion into the education system it sounds great, right? 1.1 billion extra. But what are we getting for that $1.1 billion extra? I think this is going to be a big fight. I think if you look at some of the results coming out of our public school system, you're going to see why some legislators are fighting so hard to get some of these students out of failing school districts into private good school districts that are educating their folks. If you look at the Department of Labor, the Department of Education website, only 52.7% of eighth graders are proficient or above in English language arts. Additionally, only 26.1% of eighth graders are proficient or above in math. Our public school system has a lot of issues, and it can't all be solved with simply just throwing money at the problem. There needs to be more of a performance-based budgeting system, I believe. Some school districts have been underfunded in previous years, but I don't know that just simply throwing money at a school district and hoping everything works out is going to be the answer to the problem. I think we need to truly look at, how we are funding these schools and what their performance is. If they are underperforming, kids aren't coming to class, they continuously have failing classes, kids are not ready for the workforce, let alone a higher education. Why are we going to throw millions and millions of dollars extra to them so that they can squander those dollars? I think we need to provide some of these families with a real opportunity to get their child into a school system that works for them.
Yeah, to your point, money is some ways a prerequisite, but it's not a solution, and so certainly needed, but only in the way that furthers a solution, which is not what's being proposed with education. Greg, the other one that the governor hit on was the idea of economic development, job creation. There's $500 million in bond funding that's going to expand Pennsylvania's strategic investments, $20 million to support large-scale innovation and leverage Pennsylvania's research development assets, so forth and so forth. A lot of jargon and kind of, again, top lines here. But you run the NFIB. Your organization represents what we call the small mom and pop shops, the small businesses, the small business owners, which Republicans and Democrats will tell you on the campaign trail is the backbone of America, is the backbone of Pennsylvania, of our communities. What, in that role, what do you make of this investment in the economy and economic development? Where's that money going, and where would NFIB like to see the investment being made?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Sam. Look, we love the fact that the governor is thinking about how to make the Commonwealth more competitive with our neighboring business states, right? That is certainly a plus. But where I think we get sidetracked a little bit from where the governor's aspirations are is that many of the programs that he is proposing is government picking winners and losers, right? Right now, everyone pays taxes. It all goes into a pot. And then government sits around in these dark rooms with no public view. And they come up with these programs like the Main Street Matters program. I've seen Governor Shapiro out there doing press conference after press conference with all these small towns across the Commonwealth recently. And he's going out there and saying, we want to revitalize your Main Street, right? And what they're going to do is they're going to take money from tax revenue and they're going to dump it into these pet projects in certain locations, not all locations, just in certain locations to help revitalize some of these towns. In the past 2 weeks, I haven't seen the governor appear in any Republican-led small town. Maybe he has those, at the back end of his tour. But all I've seen thus far is him in Democrat-led small towns. And so is that the government picking winners and losers again? Would that $25 million not be better in the pockets of small business owners and allow them to decide where they want to invest that tax revenue, whether that be expanding their business, hiring new folks, buying new equipment, improving the wages and benefit packages of their workers, right? I think in line with why NFIB doesn't support tax credits is that ultimately this is the government saying you get a benefit, but I'm sorry, you over here, you don't, right? But it's all of our money. It's all taxpayer revenue. And so what we would like to see really at the end of the day is many of these pet projects go away. The tax code is simplified. We get rid of many of these tax credits, and we just have a simplified tax system where more folks can keep their dollars and they can be in charge of what they want to invest it in.
Greg, when you look at this budget, again, he's trying to push this idea of not increasing taxes. Again, we don't know what the final budget will say. What is the impact that a budget like this would have on small business owners? And what's the greatest challenge that you think these small business owners are facing?
Sure. Well, I think one of the main components of this is Governor Shapiro's minimum wage battle. He has called yet again, for a $15 minimum wage. We've been very vocal at NFIB in our opposition to any increase because we recognize who our businesses are, right? NFIB business traditionally only has 10 employees. So we're not talking about some mega corporation where an employee is a number and they can just be replaced. These are often, very tight-knit small businesses that are the lifeblood of their communities. And so we actually commissioned a study last year, a third-party independent study on a piece of legislation that would take the minimum wage to $15. And what we found is that by 2033, there would be a negative employment impact of almost 104,000 jobs, with the vast majority of them coming from jobs in small businesses. And by 2033, there's also a negative economic output of almost $14 billion, right? With over $7 billion of that coming from small businesses, right? The average wage right now is far above minimum wage. We need to stop talking about minimum wage. No one's moving to a state because they have a $2 higher minimum wage. They want a quality of life wage, right? They want a working, sustainable wage, right? So we need to stop this argument about what is an appropriate minimum wage when we really need to be focusing on how can we have family sustaining jobs here, because the Commonwealth does a great job of exporting our working class folks age 18 to 64, right? We do an excellent job of importing the 65 plus population. And so we are working ourselves into a workforce shortage that I don't know that we're going to have the ability to pull ourselves out of. And proposals like increasing the minimum wage, it sounds great, but really the way it's going to play out is that if you make $12 now and you work 32 hours a week and it gets bumped up to $15 minimum wage, well, now you're going to work 27 hours a week and you're not going to have a net increase in your paycheck. It's going to be the same, or your employer may look to replace you with some automated technology that doesn't call off, that doesn't need a healthcare benefits plan, that doesn't have any issues with child care, right? And so what we've seen is a lot of our folks actually looking towards technology and investing in technology to kind of get around. They see the writing on the wall that this is being pushed yet again, even though it would decimate our small business community. And gone are the days, I worked at McDonald's when I was 14 years old, and it was a great job. I learned the soft skills of that job and how to show up on time, how to talk to customers, how to run a register, right? How to do that quick math of, counting change, right? Those opportunities are going to be gone, right? And so I don't think we're talking enough about those opportunities just being off the table at the end of the day, should they increase this wage.
And to your point, Greg, the large corporations are going to be the ones that survive this, but small businesses with 10 employees. If you lose half that workforce, your business is at much higher risk of closing than, say, a McDonald's or a Walmart.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Large business, and this is part of my job is to educate lawmakers on what is the difference between a large company and a small company. That large corporation has a team of attorneys, CPAs on staff. They have an HR department. They have a regulatory individual that's looking and making sure they're in compliance. Right. The small business owner is all of that. They wear all of those hats oftentimes. And so, it's difficult to be a small business owner. It is very much different than a corporation, and they should be treated as such.
Yeah. Greg, last question before we cut the break. There is $1.6 million in this budget to maintain the Capitol complex. Any chance those Capitol elevators are confining in the work?
No. Did you know that they are actually taking those the Capitol escalators that are always broken? They're taking them out.
Really?
Yeah, they are, at a cost of several $1 million, which I don't necessarily understand, because isn't a broken escalator just a set of stairs anyway?
Yes, absolutely.
It's government.
Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website, lighthousetv.org, for more information. Lighthouse TV, positively different. Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Greg, thank you again for joining us as you do every year, breaking down the governor's budget for us. As we close out, I understand some exciting personal news from you and your family.
Yes, absolutely. We are going to have a baby, July 4th, a little firework baby. And so my wife, Sarah, and I are very excited. We joke around with some of the members, of the General Assembly and ask them, hey, look, the budget's due June 30th, and we're to have, our child on July 4th, which one do you think is going to come first? Unfortunately, many of them are getting back to me and saying that we're most certainly probably going to have that child before the budget is complete. And so we'll certainly see where the budget season goes, but I will be at home on a little bit of parental leave taking care of our newborn. So.
That is incredible news. Huge congratulations to you and your wife, Greg. Whatever happens to the budget, you guys are the winners of this budget season. And so Absolutely. Huge congrats. And again, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Anytime, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Always. My thanks to our guest, Greg Moreland of the NFIB. And of course, my thanks to each of you for tuning in. And we hope to see you again right back here next week. Until then, my name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.